everyone and welcome to Joys That Flies. I am really excited for this video because it's something a bit more unusual and not a normal tutorial, but instead I'm going to be trying to recreate Moira Shearer's dress from the old film The Red Shoes. So a little bit about my family is that we only watch old movies, and so because of that I love anything old or vintage, and I especially like recreating the outfits from old Hollywood movies. I have already made two before. One was a Rosalind Russell outfit and the other was Myrna Loy's cocktail dress from The Thin Man. But this is hopefully going to be my best one. So the storyline of The Red Shoes is basically the life of a dancer who is the main ballerina in The Red Shoes.
The Belly of the Red Shoes is from a fairy tale by Hans Andersen.
And so there is a massive ballet scene in the film which is absolutely gorgeous and the costumes are stunning. So I've decided to try and make Moira Shearer's first dress from the ballet.
What happens in the end? Oh, and then she dies?
So in this video you're going to basically see me trying to draft the pattern from scratch myself and then sewing the final product, and hopefully I'll have a finished dress at the end. So there's enough chatting and let's get going. So here is everything I bought to make this dress. I couldn't find any fabric that would match up because it is quite a difficult shade of pink. So I decided to get all white fabric and then dye it all one shade so it would match perfectly. So to start off with the fabric, I bought this soft tulle, which as white is very see-through, but as pink I'm hoping it will show up a bit darker. And I got about 6 meters of that. There's probably too much there, but I didn't know exactly how much I would need for the skirt. And then for the bodice parts, the leotard part of the outfit, I got white satin. Once again, those two are going to be dyed the same colour. Then for embellishments and things like that, I got some blue satin. Then I got some blue ribbon to match, some red ribbon for the shoes, which I'm going to go into a bit in a minute and explain. Then I've got some pink dye, some red dye, and last but not least, a lot of gemstones. So a little explanation into the red dye and the red ribbon is I actually do dancing myself, and I have an old pair of point shoes. Now I'm making the dress from the red shoes, so obviously I'm going to need a pair of red point shoes. So I thought, change the ribbon on these, dye it red, and I have the finishing touch to the dress. So I generally always make my own sewing patterns, and I've done various different ways of doing it, but I've never taped my tailor's dummy. But I've seen lots of people when they've been making corsets and things using the masking tape method, which is basically covering your tailor's dummy in masking tape and then drawing the design on. And I thought there's a similar sort of thing with the leotard. It's got to be very fitted and the top half of it is almost like a corset shape. So I thought it's the perfect time to try this way out. So I just went ahead and covered half of Miss Dum Dum, sorry, that's what I call my tailor's dummy. I covered at least half of her in masking tape because obviously I'm only going to draw on one side of the front because it's symmetrical on the other side. And then once Miss Dum Dum was fully covered, I went ahead and started drawing the pattern. First of all, I measured the exact distance between and drew a line straight down the middle because there's a centre seam in the dress. And then it was simply a case of drawing it as accurately as possible. This all feels very sacrilegious. And I don't even know if I'm doing it right. Okay, that's the front done, I think, or as best as it's going to get. You can see I've drawn a line down here for the panel, and then there's also the drop V here. So I must admit, this whole time I had been dreading taking the masking tape off of Miss Dum Dum, but surprisingly it came off all in one piece and very smoothly. Then I just cut it all out of the masking tape. My scissors did keep on sticking to it, but eventually I got there. And then the final thing to do for the front pieces was I transferred them to paper, added a seam allowance, cut them out, wrote down on them what they were, and that was the front all done. Then I went ahead and repeated that whole process for the back. And here are all of my pattern pieces for the bodice all done. So I've got my 2 for the front, then my 2 for the back, and I also cut out just this long rectangle for the bias for when I sew it later on. It's suddenly become really cold. So the next part of the pattern piece would be the bottom half of the leotard, which is a separate pattern piece. But I didn't know how you could do it with masking tape or how you could drape it on your dummy. So I may have slightly cheated and used one of my old leotard patterns and adapted it for this pattern. The only things I needed to change was the waist, because it needs to be a V to match up with the top half. And also the pattern before had been for stretch fabric, and obviously this isn't for stretch fabric. So maybe there is a way you can do it on your dummy, but I didn't know, so I cheated it. Then all I had to do was sew the mock-up. I just did the basic seams and made it very rough because I just wanted it for the fit. And the top half actually came out stunning at the front. I have to say, the masking tape method is a win. The bottom half of the leotard didn't go quite so smoothly. After I made it, I then tried it on and it was a dreadful fit. So I had to completely adjust the pattern. I did another one and it was a bit better. I then had to do another one just so I could get it perfect, and that time it was a good fit. I had found some mock-up fabric that was quite similar to the actual fabric I'll be using, so I decided to do an entire mock-up of both the top half and bottom half and sew them together like I will be later on. And it turned out perfectly and I'm really happy with it, so I think I'm completely done with all the pattern making. Right, it's a new day. I've finished all the pattern making, and so it's time to dye the fabric. So first of all, I pre-wet the fabric. This feels so sacrilegious. Oh my goodness. I have seen dancers wash their point shoes actually, so it's obviously safe. And then you have to add things like vinegar and soap to hot water before you add the dye to make sure that the fabric soaks up the colour properly. And then I just added the whole bottle of dye to it. It looks really dark.
And it rinses, and also you wash it out.
A lot rinses out, doesn't it? Yeah. So the satin was perfect, so I left that in the dye to soak more, but the tulle I took out and rinsed it through hot water to try and get rid of some of the colour. That did help a lot, but it was still a bit dark. So after we'd left it for a while in the colour fixative, we then took it out, rinsed it in cold water and left it out to dry. So for the point shoes we did the exact same process, but this time, first of all, we only put half a bottle of dye in because it was only 2 shoes and I didn't know how deep it would come out because I didn't want it like a dark cherry. So after we put the point shoes in then, we tried it, left it for a while, but it wasn't soaking it up in enough colour and it was coming out almost slightly orangey. So I added the rest of the bottle in and left it in there for at least half an hour.
I look like I've just been making Frankenstein's monster.
And I have to say, they looked gorgeous. So the fabric has completely dried and the satin is perfect. It's just what I wanted. And then there's the disappointment to the family. it's very dark. It's almost bordering on purpley, but I mean, I suppose you can tell that they're both the same colour, just two different shades, but we do have an idea for that, so hopefully it will work. If not, it's back to the fabric shop for more fabric, or you never know, there might be some dye reversative that we can find, or something of that sort. And then the point shoes, which I'm now obsessed with. Look how gorgeous they are. As you can see, I changed the ribbon, added fresh ribbon on, so they are all completely done now. I can put these aside and not think about them anymore. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the skirt part of the dress, because I feel like if I do the bodice, everybody including me is going to get fed up with it, and so the skirt I'm not going to go too much into because it's like a million half circle skirts, so that can be quite boring. So I'm going to get going, cut it out, and then we can start sewing it. And here's the idea we had to fix the colour problem. I had a load of white tulle just lying around left over from a previous project, but the idea is that I'm going to put 2 layers of white tulle in between the 3 layers of pink, and that will help lighten it but still keep the fullness and depth of the skirt. So if you look closely at the skirt, it's got like these blue triangles around the waist. So all I'm going to do is simply cut out about 12, I think I need, small triangles. They're only going to be thin, and then I can add them to the skirt. And then I just had to ruffle all of the waists of the skirt pieces. So I did have to add 3 more layers to the skirt because it was too sheer, but I've ruffled all of them, and I've decided, I know I said I was going to do the skirt first, but I'm now going to move on to the leotard part because I don't know the exact amount I need to ruffle it by. So instead of sewing it all, getting it wrong, and then having to undo all of my work, I'm going to leave it where it is, sew the leotard, and then move back to the skirt. So the basic structure of the leotard is all done, and I'm really happy with how it's looking. So it's just time now to add all the little embellishments to it, and then the leotard's finished. To start off with, I added the ruffles to the sleeves, which was a nice and simple job. And now I'm just going to figure out how to do the ruffle type embellishment along the top of this bodice. So I'm just going to place 2 pieces of ribbon on top of each other and then sew down the centre and create a ruffle, and hopefully that will give me the sort of look that it's got. Well, the 2 pieces of ribbon didn't work. In fact, they wouldn't ruffle at all. So I tried with one and that worked a lot better. So I've pinned it to the leotard and I think it looks quite similar to the original. Okay, I must admit that was a struggle. Very fiddly to sew, but it was so worth it. I think that's as similar to the original as I'm going to get, and I'm pretty pleased with it. It looks very effective. So now I'm starting on the main embellishment of the dress, and that's the flower right in the centre. So to start off with, I created the pattern, then cut out these little petals, and then I've just edged them with my overlocker. And then this was just an extra idea of mine. I think it's going to be easier to explain it by just showing you what I'm about to do with it. But it's just a long rectangle and it's edged, and it's going to be like in the centre of the flower. Now I want to try and get that fold in the petals that she has on the dress, and the only way I could think of doing it and having it permanently is by stiffening it. So I've got this fabric stiffener which I've had for years and I've never actually used before. So I'm going to paint it on, fold the petal over and pin it down, and once it's dry, hopefully it will stay permanently like that. I'm just going to leave those to dry in front of my little halogen heater. So whilst I was waiting, I took my little rectangle of fabric and sewed a straight line down the centre of it to create ruffles, and I literally ruffled it until it curled up into this tiny little ball. The petals are all dry now, and they actually worked. They're holding their shape really well, and so I'm now just going to assemble it, see how it looks, and then hopefully I'll be able to add it to the dress. So I've just finished sewing the flower to the leotard, and then the last thing to do is to cover the sleeves and the flower and the ruffle in sequins. Now that the leotard's all done, I can move back to the skirt and make it with the exact waist measurement, which will be so much easier, and hopefully it will all go alright. The dress is nearly complete because I've sewn the skirt to the leotard. So I'm just doing the scary part now, which is adding the grommets on, and I've done one side. What I've got to do is the second side, and then I can lace it up. And then I just had the last two accessories to make, which was the hair bow and then the bracelet.